I'm Dr. Deepak Chopra, and I have a very special guest today, Maureen Seaberg. She's a synesthete, and today we're going to talk about her experiences with synesthesia. Thank you so much for joining me, Maureen.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Namaste, Dr. Chopra, and your audience around the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
There will be people who recognize themselves in this today somehow.
Yeah, well, wonderful. So, you've had this wonderful experience called synesthesia. It has fascinated me for many reasons, but our audience probably is not even familiar with the experience. So, can you share with the audience in the beginning a little bit about your life, where you grew up, your parents, school, whatever, and then your experiences with synesthesia in the beginning, now, and how you happen to be in this conversation. Basically, just shoot the breeze with me, telling our audience a little bit about your life.
Well, I'm a New Yorker. I'm a native New Yorker, and I'm a product of New York City public schools. And we certainly didn't know what synesthesia was growing up. And but I remember in kindergarten saying to my mom that asking my mom, why is A always yellow? And that it had a color wasn't really my concern. Everything has color to me. People's voices, music, numbers, all sorts of things. But I wanted to know why it always had to be yellow. That interesting. So that's how normal it was for me. But I was beginning to realize as a kindergartner that not everybody had this experience. And my mom, who's a wonderful lady, and I still have both my parents, Richard and Mary, God bless them. My mom had a really good answer. She said, well, perhaps the visual aids in your classroom are that color. What color is A in the classroom? And I knew it was black on a white background. So therefore, this didn't match at all. And so I began to have questions. But to be honest with you, Dr. Chopra, I also began to be silent about it. Like that was the beginning at 5 or 6 years old of knowing that it was different and not neurotypical, but also learning it concerned people a little bit. It made them worry. Now, however, all these years later, I'm very versed in what it is and what it isn't, and I am convinced it is not only a gift, often found in creative people, but it also seems to lay the groundwork for some super abilities. And I thank you for your awareness and teaching to me of the senses for so many years. Like in MetaHuman, it was all about sensory potentials, in my estimation. And we really started this conversation about 10 years ago in Stockholm, I think, when I had the pleasure to meet you at the Toward a Science Consciousness Conference.
So now describe to our audience and to me what exactly you experience.
Were I listening to Yo-Yo Ma play the cello, Dr. Chopra, I would consistently get a glossy, wavy shape like this, about a yard in front of me and about a yard off the ground.
So you would see that shape, that glossy shape,
Always.
actually in front of you, a yard in front of you.
But you know what's interesting, Dr. Chopra? I wonder if it's some sort of liminal quantum space. Because even as a child, I knew these impressions, these floating colors and shapes, could not be held, could not be pushed away, were there, not there. And yet they're consistent, and every synesthete reports his or her own experience. So it's an interesting, has an interesting quality to it.
So when you hear sound, you also see color. You hear both the sound and you also see the color, right?
Or shapes, yes.
So, or shape. So every sound for you right now is accompanied by some color or shape. Is that true right now as you're listening to me? Are you seeing colors?
Yes, it is, Dr. Chopra. And so I do not get, as you modulate when you speak, it is not many different colors and shapes. It is consistently a very beautiful dove gray. And it kind of comes and goes.
A really beautiful what? What do you say?
A dove color gray.
I see.
A little deeper than what's on the walls here. And it's not, so it's not tonal beyond, when you modulate, it doesn't change. It's something in your voice for me. But
Yeah.
another synesthete might see multiple things. There's no Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, but right now, as you're speaking to me, you're also seeing something, right?
Yes.
You're seeing the visual corresponding correlate of that sound.
Yes.
Whatever sound I'm producing, you're seeing some kind of visual shape or color associated with that, right?
Yes.
So, okay. Do you have that experience with, you said earlier, with letters and numbers too?
Yes. So we call the grapheme synesthesia, which is that associated with numbers or letters, sort of a gateway synesthesia to the others. It is the most common form.
I see. So, as for example, right now, these are colors, right?
Yes.
But also letters here.
Well, I know that they are white letters surrounded in a deep red on a sort of yellow background, but your D is brown, both E's are red, your P is peach, your A is yellow, your K is teal, your C is light blue, your H is indigo, your O is white. Again, the P, the R, the A. R is terracotta. So the letters are consistently colored from childhood forward. And they exist, again, in some sort of liminal space between what I know is on the cover of that book and what is the synesthesia. And I think that's been one of the problems with the definition of it, if I may, Dr. Chopra, because a lot of people say, oh, it's cross senses, it's mixed up senses. But in fact, I am seeing, if I'm right, I think I am seeing the actual beautiful colors on your book, but I'm getting a bonus layer.
So you're seeing the actual colors, but then superimposed are these other colors.
Superimposed, exactly. Almost like an aura in the foreground.
I see. In the foreground. Okay, get it.
And
so
it's also a thought in my head, because as I'm talking to you and I'm trying to tell you what color D your initial is, I'm also thinking brown. I'm seeing brown, I'm thinking brown. So it's sort of layered.
Now, so we've seen that colors are experienced when you hear sound. Colors are experienced when you see letters. Colors and shapes are seen when you see numbers. What about when you taste? Say, you taste something like coffee or strawberry. What happens?
Fortunately, well, or unfortunately, I do not have that form. But there are people who, like the famous book by Dr. Richard Cytowic, The Man Who Tasted Shapes, was about a man. I think you and Dr. Hoffman talked about this one time on one of your great shows. A man who literally could taste the shape of triangles, feel the shape of triangles while making a chicken sauce. And there were no textures to that sauce. it was in his mind.
So he's making a chicken sauce, and what is he experiencing?
Apparently he's a gourmet chef, this gentleman, and he knew that the chicken sauce would be ready when he got the sensation of triangles on his tongue, which had nothing to do with the actual texture of the sauce.
He sensed as a sensation a triangle.
Yes.
And
then he would know it was ready. But
what are some other examples of synesthesia? Can you see a color and actually experience a taste or a smell or a sound?
Mine doesn't work that way, but yes, there are people who go in that direction. There's a wonderful grapheme synesthesia example in Sir Robert Cailloux, the co-inventor of the internet with Tim Berners-Lee. He is a synesthete, Dr. Cailloux, and he told me one time while working at CERN, where they have, of course, guarded doorways and passageways with keys and passcodes, he had to memorize a passcode and had forgotten it. So he actually closed his eyes and remembered the corresponding colors and worked backwards and opened the door through the tunnels of CERN. That's amazing, right?
So the memory of colors gave him the clue to the code. Just the memory of color.
Synesthesia is a fabulous mnemonic. It's almost like the memory palace exercise, right? The ancients and our school teachers teach us, where you can better remember a list of groceries if you picture each grocery along your path home somewhere significant, the bread at the mailbox, the milk on the front steps. And so these colors are like underlining whatever it is you have to remember. So synesthetes are usually very good at spelling and very good at remembering phone numbers, things like that.
Right now, you're a writer. That's your profession, right?
Yes.
What do you mostly write about?
Mostly I write about the senses. And right now I am writing a book for St. Martin's Press about some of the extraordinary super abilities in the senses that are being measured in some cases for the first time. So you may have heard at Rockefeller University in 2016, they proved that people can see a single photon with their naked eyes.
Correct.
This is astonishing. And I find it so ironic, Dr. Chopra, because here we are worried about the machines and the robots, but they're actually pointing a finger back at us in a way, aren't they? And saying, hey, look what you can do. And so there's that. There's Dr. Ramachandran, who I know you're very well acquainted with, did some wonderful research out at UC San Diego with haptics. And they took silicon, and on one piece of silicon, they added a molecule of thickness, and on the other, there was none. And their subjects were asked to feel with their own hands, nothing added, which piece of silicon had the extra molecule, and they did it with their bare hands.
Right. So what you're saying is our eyes can sense a single photon, but our skin can sense a single molecule or a
single molecule. Yes, doctor. And our ears can hear amplitudes with sound small, with waves smaller than an atom. The Israelis have discovered a new set of taste buds for discerning fresh water. They used to think we could smell 10,000 things, which is a lot. They now know it's a trillion scents. And so I say in the book that it's as though it's like finding out that oil painting your grandmother willed you is an old master. except you are the painting. It's you. We are much finer than we know. As our mutual friend Bill Bushell sometimes says to me, we are very high-tech soft tissue technology. And the senses are the gateway, and so important.
Okay, now let's go back. We can take our senses in at the level of quanta. By quanta, we mean the smallest indivisible units of energy and information. That's how quanta are defined. The smallest indivisible units of energy and information that come to us in the form of photons, or vibrations of the atmosphere, or molecules, doesn't matter, but it is at the most fundamental level. All we're ingesting is energy and information, but we don't experience that. We experience the world, we experience our body, we experience an iPhone, or we experience a book. And this is actually the point I was trying to make in MetaHuman, which is that the physical world as we experience it, including our own physical body, is a confederation of these perceptual activities. And these perceptual activities are in turn a modification of consciousness. So, you know, when I look at you, for example, or I look at a phone, or I look at my hand, if I was a baby, I would not know that, you know, that's Maureen Seaberg, or this is a hand, or this is a phone, or this is a book. I would, in fact, be bathed in consciousness with these fluctuating particles and waves. I would be immersed in that goo, so to speak, because my body is also part of that. And somehow the process of human construction through language, categorization, memory, and culture, somehow, and that's where the hard problem of consciousness comes in, is how do we convert these impulses of energy and information into an experience which is not energy and information. The experience is colors, sensations, shapes, images, feelings, thoughts that somehow conglomerate to create the construct that we call mind, body, and world. In other words, mind, body, and world are fluctuations of consciousness that project themselves. This is the Eastern view as the appearance of a physical world. In Sanskrit, that's called Jagat Mithya. So the fact is your body and your mind and your ideas and your memories. You gave me a very good example of that chef who had to just, not the chef, somebody else, the guy at CERN. All he had to remember is an experience of colors, and he found the code. So memory, which is in consciousness, colors, which are in consciousness, codes are in consciousness. But the collection of all this actually somehow mysteriously is constructed by humans as the concept of mind, body, and world. So we as humans, not even as human body minds, as human consciousness, we conceive, construct, govern, and become the world we experience. And our body mind is part of that whole fluctuation. Now, if we truly understood this, there would not be a hard problem of consciousness, because the hard problem consciousness assumes a physical world and then tries to figure out how does that physical world produce consciousness or mind. And that's where we get stuck. And it's the second most open question in science. What is the biological basis of consciousness? But your example and other examples saying, actually, there is no biological basis of consciousness. Biology is also an experience in consciousness.
Yes, and this mixes the qualia up even more so.
That's right. So
what are the qualia if 4% of people are having this bonus experience? And I need to tell you, our mutual friend, David Chalmers, who coined the heart problem, was a synesthete doctor until the age of 21.
Oh, I see.
And he remembers losing it. He actually made a note, an entry in his journal about the day the music died, so to speak.
No, this is very interesting to me because Chalmers is one of the smartest philosophers in this whole area. In fact, he coined the phrase "hard problem of consciousness." But I don't know what his take is now. I recently saw a video of him. Somebody asked him, or somebody had asked him, is there any proof of consciousness in the universe? And he actually gave a very good answer. He says every sentient being is a data point. Every brain is a data point for consciousness in the universe, because after all, brains are also activities of the universe, right?
Yes.
But I think we could go further. The brain itself is a collection of qualia.
Mm.
You see, it's anything.
Kind of a hall of mirrors, just.
Yeah, anything that you can see, anything that you can touch. See, let's get this very clear, because you and I can understand that most people have a problem understanding. There are no colors or shapes or forms in the physical world, period. They're constructed in consciousness. There's no sound in the physical world. It's constructed in consciousness. There is no fragrance or odor in the physical world. It's constructed in consciousness. Similarly, there's no sensation in the physical world. It's constructed in consciousness. There's no thought in the physical world. It's constructed in consciousness. There's no emotion in the physical world. It's constructed in consciousness. There's no reflection. There's no theory. There's no science in the physical world. The whole thing is constructed in consciousness, but we get so bamboozled by language and constructs and culture and thousands of years of conditioning that we actually believe that there's a physical world and there is a physical body in that physical world, when actually the physical world is an ever-changing continuum of perceptual activity and consciousness, and so is the body, and so is the mind. And this is where it leads to, in the great wisdom traditions of the world, which said, Wittgenstein, the German philosopher, said, we are asleep, our life is a dream, but once in a while, we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming. But also in Vedanta, Kashmir Shaivism, everything that you experience is called Jagat Mithya. Jagat means world, and Mithya means appearance. So everything is appearing as the world, which includes body, mind, animals, species, trees, Milky Way galaxies, stars. They're all being constructed, conceived, governed, and coming into existence in a non-physical, non-local domain outside of space and time. Even this conversation right now is being processed in a domain that's outside in space and outside of space and time, but we are experiencing a theater of space-time and causality. We are experiencing a computer, where we're experiencing sounds. Anybody who's locked into this URL or has the same coordinates on their Zoom, they're also experiencing the same thing, but with minor differences based on how they construct their reality. But each sentient being is a multiverse. Each sentient being is a universe unto himself. And what we call fundamental reality is the matrix of sentient beings with leaky margins experiencing both common and unique realities.
If I may, I love that you went here, because synesthesia, there are many metaphysical things about synesthesia. For example, many of us have OBEs, out-of-body experiences. At the same conference where I was privileged to meet you for the first time, I met Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel. And Pim told me his laboratory his office for cardiac patients had become an ad hoc laboratory for near-death experiences, because we're so good, thankfully, at bringing such people back from the brink now. But he approached me at the conference and he said, but I need to ask you, these people are coming back with synesthesia and they didn't have it before. So are all of you having OBEs in the opposite direction, right? And so we all had dinner and shared our experiences. It's fascinating, isn't it? And one metaphysician said to me, I think it's a loosening of the etheric body of some sort. I don't know.
See, all these experiences are processed in consciousness, but also the interpretation depends on our programming, whether it's a physicalist programming, metaphysical programming, philosophical programming, cultural programming. But now you raised a very interesting thing that reminded me. You also mentioned Ramachandran. So the experiment where he strokes your nose, but have you heard about that experiment?
Is it the mirrors and the phantom limbs, or no?
Yeah, phantom limbs and mirrors. You can get rid of the experience of a phantom limb through mirrors, but you can also project your nose or your parts of your body and see them out there if you give them the same sensory stimulus. So if I stroke your nose, but I have some object there which looks like a nose, and you are holding on to it, and I'm stroking both your skin here and your skin there, you'll soon start seeing your nose out there. You'll soon not only have, you'll have an out of nose experience or something, not just a phantom limb, but you can have a phantom nose. You can, and it can be vice versa. The point is, there's no such thing as a physical body. It's a projection. It's a projection, a conglomeration, a federation, a confederation of qualia that we interpret as the physical world, the physical body, whatever it is. The dreamscape can be infinite galaxies, or it can be a photon. And you and I are fictional characters in that collective dreamscape. Most of the time,
yes.
Most of the time we agree on the dream, but then the synesthetics come along and they say, no, I'm dreaming something else here right now.
Yes. And it's also interesting in terms of laying the groundwork for some other extraordinary abilities, Dr. Chopra, because as I write this book, I have come across 3 super smellers who are also synesthetes, including Joy Milne, the wonderful nurse in Scotland, who can smell Parkinson's disease and is working on early diagnostics to help patients. Myself, I have been found to have the 4th cone class for color perception. I am actually a DNA-proven functional tetrachromat.
Describe that. What's it?
So all my life, doctor, I have politely disagreed with people about what color things were. You know, someone would say that's red, and I would be very, very specific, even as a child, and say it's more like brick, or it's more like a glass of wine, like knowing the difference between maroon and red. It was always a few clicks one way or another, until I finally I heard something on a podcast, and I thought, you know, this may be genetic actually, because it persisted my entire life. And I was tested at the University of Washington at Seattle. My DNA came back positive for the 4th cone class. And now I'm being studied at Arizona State University. They've put me through some functionality testing, and I've passed. So it's both the genotype and the phenotype. And there are huge implications for things like this. First of all, it only exists so far in women. There are 4 or 5 of us who are public about this around the world. So you need 2 X chromosomes, And in the same family, the men are often colorblind. So talk about recombinant DNA and the way things happen, even in a single family. But the interesting thing, doctor, is that 2 out of 3 American women with functional tetrachromacy that I'm aware of, including myself, are also synesthetes, circling back to our point. So they believe the perfect storm for functional tetrachromacy is the genotype, then a lifelong interest or training in the arts where you would have the exposure. And thirdly, a good vocabulary. Language is so neuroplastic, as you know, right? You need to know what things are in order to express it. So we're wondering, it's not proven, it's just a question. Did synesthesia prime us in some way with all these involuntary colors all the time for functional supervision? Remains to be seen, but it's one of the good questions.
So you call this tetrachromacy?
Tetrachromacy, yes.
You said there were 3 super.
Yes, there are 3 Americans that I'm aware of, including myself. The other 2 are very successful interior designers using their gift. And it's funny, my friends find it funny with me because birds and dinosaurs are also tetrachromats. And as you know, I love birding. And so I have asked the researchers, do I love them and taking pictures of them so much because I am seeing the feathers as they are intended, which is an explosion of color and texture and form meant to attract, meant to display. And many of the common birds that people would just walk by stop. So it's another question we're considering. I may not be exactly like every bird, but maybe there's some overlap. And I'm seeing feathers the way another bird would see it.
Now, you're also saying that there were other supernormal abilities that you uncovered as you were writing your book.
Yes.
Like what?
So I was talking to a COVID nurse, a wonderful frontline responder who we're all so grateful for in this horrible pandemic we've gone through, about her experience. I actually wanted to know if she could smell coronavirus. And she couldn't. However, she is the go-to person in her pediatric ward for childhood congenital illness. So she can smell all manner of disease on newborn babies. And I said, how do you know? And she said, it just, when I hold them, it comes to me. And she's been a nurse for 20 or more years. So she's begun to learn what smells like what, or what the mom had for dinner before she delivered the baby. It's all very apparent to her. And I said, so how do you do that? I mean, a hospital is such a busy place. I've covered stories there, you've served there. How do you focus on the smell? And she said, when I receive a newborn infant in the neonatal ward, I close my eyes and I just smell the baby. And she has been right numerous times, and that will be in the book.
So now we've talked about outer body experiences, we've talked about in-body experiences.
Yes, such as they are.
But the issue, of course, is consciousness is not in the body, nor is it outside the body. It is formless. So it is, we say it has no form. And if it had a form, we'd be able to see it, but it has no boundaries. So it's infinite, but it expresses its. it expresses itself as species and culture specific experiences. And so we cannot know the experience of another species, but you just mentioned birds. And I have met a neuroscientist at the same conference, the Science of Consciousness, who actually could have a relationship with a bird. She could summon a bird, she could pet it and let it go. And of course, we know we all communicate with our dogs and cats, even though we don't know what exactly they're seeing or hearing.
These Fenwickian things, right, Dr. Chopra?
Say that again. Say that again.
Are these Fenwickian
Yes.
sort of things?
Yes.
Yeah, we change when a birder walks into the woods. Excuse the cigarette there. When a birder walks into the woods, the animals are aware. It's a system of some sort. They're aware of us, we're aware of them. I always tell bird watchers, when you walk through, see what you flush out, but also pirouette as you walk the trail, because they're filling in behind you. They're watching, even if you don't see them.
And you don't know exactly, what they're seeing, because it's a completely different perceptual activity with processing some leaky margins across species.
Margins, indeed. I mean, I don't claim to see the ultraviolet that a bird would, but I'm very sensitive to the iridescence of their feathers. Birds that people don't think have iridescence actually have iridescence. I have photographic proof.
So now, we've talked about extrasensory perception or finest level of perception, but do you know of people who can, from your experience, who can hear remotely or see remotely or sense remotely in any way, shape, or form?
Well, this is mind-boggling to me, but I interviewed Dr. Edward May, who I'm sure you're aware led the Stargate program, remote viewing program for the US government, for CIA for many years. And he still has a laboratory in California. And he told me his best remote viewers are synesthetes, including Joe McMoneagle, the Army, very successful remote viewer. And he's exploring why now. He's continuing to explore the question. So the top ones. And he also said that in his current laboratory, he only hires synesthetes. So that's rather interesting.
Of course, everyone's familiar with the phrase extrasensory perception, but what you were also talking about here, synesthesia, is what could easily be called parasensory perception. Parallel processing at the same time. Would you agree with that phrase, maybe?
I would think that's very apt, Doctor, because I don't like to call it cross-sensory the way people do often, cross-sensory perception. I think it's bonus sensory. So this parallel pathway really suits my experience of it.
Maureen, when's your book coming out?
It is, I'm finishing it by end of year, so hopefully next year or early 2023.
Well, we should do another conversation when you have the book out.
I would be honored, Dr. Chopra.
And
You get it, and you not only get it, you elevate it. And I thank you for having this conversation.
No, it's been a privilege. And also, I think in this one conversation, we have clues to why the great sages and seers and prophets said we actually create our own reality. But of course, we have perceptual limitations based on our genetic inheritance, which is species specific, but it also has leaky margins. And if we actually begin to understand synesthesia, we might have a solution to the two most open questions in science. One is, what's the universe made of? And my answer to that is, the universe is made of consciousness. And the second is, what's the biological basis of consciousness? And my answer is there's none. Biology is also a collection of qualia, experiences. We just call it biology. So
And
for
may I
me,
put one more thing in that you will love and help you on your path? Dr. Roger Walsh at UC Irvine did a study showing that synesthesia can be acquired, can be situational. And do you know what the pathway to achieving it was?
well,
Meditation.
yes, of course.
Meditation.
Meditation, because you transcend the senses. That's why.
Absolutely.
Well, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you.